the sooner I start teaching, the better off I think we're going to be. So they said team ministry was going to be great. Oh yeah, that's good.
Well, it appears that it is.
Oh no, it's going great. Oh my gosh, yeah, no. In all seriousness, it's such a blessing to have Derek
You're
here.
probably enjoying it as much as you are.
Oh yeah, no. What I enjoy the most is very similar to what I got to enjoy when Pastor Tom was here. It's nice to be able to listen to a good sermon, right? I mean, you take that for granted as someone who gets to preach, right? You just preach, but you don't always get the chance to sit back and listen to a good sermon, and I get to do that still, right? Like that's one of the things that doesn't always happen in team ministry. So I'm very blessed by that.
We get to hear a good sermon every Sunday.
Yeah. He's preaching every week now? I didn't know that. Woo! No, I love preaching. I'd be pretty upset. Yeah, no, I don't, Nate. I appreciate that. But
You guys are like golf buddies.
yeah, it's not great. It's
No, I mean, you harass each other.
yeah. Oh, I know what you mean, Ross. Yeah, it's trouble. No, it's really good, and God is blessed. That's the thing with that. It always comes back to that. God does amazing things, and He's bringing amazing people here, people in our congregation on the weekends, during the week, staff. It's incredible. So it's a real blessing. 100%. All right, so let's get into this again. That's fun. Chapter 34 of Genesis. And if you remember what we talked about last week, the defiling of Dinah, which was rape, but not just rape, it's kidnapping, right? It's a lot of things going on there. We have this instance where they're negotiating, right? Because I believe it's Shechem. Shechem is the one who did the deplorable act, right? And now wants to take her as his wife. So they're negotiating the terms of that. Jacob is very kind of not interested, not so much in negotiating. He's just not interested in any kind of avenging his daughter in this, right? He's just kind of kicking back and not really interested in engaging. So the brothers have stepped into that, which, as we talked about last week, is a very common thing, right? We talked about the dowry prices and things, and how it was very common for brothers and the mom to be involved in that, because they would be the main recipients of whatever that dowry purchase was, or whatever that price was. And so this isn't unusual. We then talked about how the brothers, I should say that Shechem and Hamor basically came out and said, listen, what we'll give you is full integration, right? You can be part of our people. You can be 100% with us. No fears or threats of anything. We're all together, one big happy family. And that's where the brothers came in and basically said, yeah, that sounds good, but if that's going to happen, then circumcision is the way to go, right? And that fits with what God had talked to them about long ago when He implemented the act of circumcision, that it was meant to be something that was part of the family, part of anybody who married in. Like, it was a big deal, because that was one of the ways for salvation. That was part of being and becoming part of God's family, right? Like baptism is today. That's how we become part of God's family. Circumcision was that thing. And so if there were outsiders, yes, then you would want that. You would want them to be circumcised so they'd be a part of God's family. Unfortunately, the brothers did not necessarily have evangelism in mind as they're talking about this, right? Which is where you definitely don't want to take something that God intends to be a promise and a blessing and grace-filled into something that is more on the revenge side, which is where they're at on this, okay? So I think that's pretty much where we left off. Any questions about that before we jump in then to kind of how this story finds its conclusion? Now, one of the things I mentioned last time is just to keep paying attention to how Dinah is designated here, right? She starts off as the daughter of Leah. She continues on talking about his daughter, meaning Jacob, right? You see all these different transitions that are happening as it goes through, and as you walk through it, you see this transition from essentially Dinah being Jacob's responsibility to, at the end, becoming the son's responsibility, and even the possessive pronouns associated with that are more reflective of the sons than they are of Jacob. And it's just kind of that transition as the story moves from even Jacob's involvement to the son's involvement. It's not a coincidence that those things, like the possessive pronouns for Jacob and Dinah, fade as he fades into the picture and grow as the sons grow into the picture. Okay? So if there's no other questions, we'll start in verse 13. It says, the sons of Jacob answered Shechem, and we were here last week, but I just kind of want to run into it, if that makes sense. So they answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to him, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter, and we will be gone. Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young men did not delay to do the thing because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Okay? So just stop there for a second. So again, there are the terms and conditions, right? It is very much the deceit behind it. The phrasing there in verse 13, that the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully. Same verbiage, same word that was used in describing Jacob robbing Esau of his birthright with Isaac, right? So it's kind of a wink and a nod as to how they're acting here to Jacob's day and his growing up. And so it just comes across very much this way. And we see that there is an agreement, right? They're on board with the plan. Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, they're on the train with this. And so now the next step is to get the rest of the people on board, because we're not just talking about Hamor and Shechem. What the sons are asking is that basically everybody who's part of that town, right? If this was Plymouth, everybody on Plymouth would have to, or in Plymouth would have to get on board with this. Okay? So that's kind of what we see in this next stage here. So it says, now he was the most honored of all his father's house, this being Shechem. Okay? And I'm actually going to stop there for one quick second, because I don't want to miss this point. You know, how could Shechem get away with rape, kidnap, all those things? This speaks to it a little bit, right? You talk about who he is in the community. He's very prestigious, right? Somebody that they wouldn't want to speak up to, right? Or even challenge because of his position. And we see that as we walk through this. So, you know, it's not an uncommon thing today that people with power, position, they break laws or whatever it might be, and they may get some special treatment, or people may not want to confront them because of that position, because of what might happen to them if they do it, right? And so you see kind of that same thought process here. How could nobody stand up? Even why would Jacob kind of, you know, shrink back a little bit from this? Well, yeah, you know, this guy is a pretty well-known dude. Like, people love him. He's got a lot of influence and power. You're not just going to be making him and his family mad. You're going to be taking on the whole town. Okay? So it's just something to keep in mind there. So verse 20. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us, to become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. And boy, if that's not telling, right? Whose city? His city, right? This is Shechem's city, okay? This is Hamor's city. They own this town. You picture Wild West style, right? Almost in terms of, you know, the person who owns that town, right? Like, that's kind of the gist here. But essentially what we see here is Hamor and Shechem are going, okay, so we've got to convince the town that they've got to get circumcised, all the males. It's not a small task, right? Essentially, why would they want to do that? Because they're not going to get anything out of it. They're just doing this, or they're asking people to do this so that Shechem can get married to this girl, right? So what does it matter to Joe Schmo in the town if Shechem gets married to this girl? Why would I want to get circumcised then if that's the case, right? And so that's the case that Hamor and Shechem are making here. Like, listen, what's in it for you is all of the property, all of their things. Like, they become part of our economy, and our economy grows, right? And you then become more prosperous. This is where you come in. I get a wife, you all get wealthier as a result of this, okay? That's kind of the gist here. That's kind of the bend that he's doing, okay? So in other words, it's what's in it for me as a townsperson? I could become more wealthy, right? I could have more stuff, if you will, than I do today. That's kind of the sales pitch that he's given, okay? Now, a couple things to note, like in verse 20, it says, Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city. So if you remember back to Sodom and Gomorrah, we talked about this, right? The angels came into the town, there we go, and Lot met them at the gate of the city because he was kind of hanging out there, right? And we talked about that, how the gate of the city was the place where business gets done. It's the political center. It's like the city council, if you will. Right? And so what's happening here is no different than in Sodom and Gomorrah. Shechem and Hamor are conducting a political business, if you will, at the gate of the city. That's what's going on there. That's what they mean by the gate of the city. We see that in Samuel later on. Not so much with Samuel, but with David and one of his sons who rebels against David. He meets everybody at the gate of the city, and he just says, oh, man, if there were a king who would deal with all these injustices, wouldn't that be great? And they go, yeah, that'd be great. And he goes, oh, yeah, that's me, right? And then the whole thing just kind of throws up in David's face, and he has to flee because all of a sudden everybody's after him. So it's the place where political things happen. So that's what's taking place here. It's not just random happenstance or, hey, somebody's coming and going. It was the call to order. It was Robert's Rules of Order being laid out, right? Like, it's all these things. They're having a meeting, essentially, okay? Any questions about that at all?
I might be missing something here, but doesn't God want to isolate his people from other peoples?
Tell me more about that.
No, what I mean is, and maybe it's in a different area, I'm not sure, but
No.
why would they want to get together? I mean, I understand the politics behind it, but that's it seems that, why would God want to let them get together as a community? Yeah,
he doesn't want them to, right?
Right.
That's very clear in previous chapters as Abraham and Isaac and Jacob find wives, right? The Messianic line.
Yeah.
It's very important. Something that was set up with Abraham. We talked about that, right?
Yeah.
Esau went and found a wife from somewhere else, and that was not just rebelling against his dad. It was rebelling against Abraham, right? Because that was Abraham's thing. Like, no, we have to go back to this home place to go find our wives because that's what matters. And so it's not so much that God is on board with this. It's not even that the sons are on board with this. Shechem and Hamor are on board with this because they don't care. Yeah. They're not interested. They're not interested in what God has to say about this.
Right.
They're very much just interested in their pockets and what it means for them. For Shechem and Hamor, it's more so getting Shechem a wife, right? That he has wronged in so many ways. And so for Jacob and his sons, I should just say for the sons of Jacob, they have no intention of joining in on that, right? Of becoming one nation. They want nothing to do with that. This is all just a ploy to get them in a vulnerable place so they can kill them. That's the gist.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is not a God-ordained thing. And that's one of the key things to look at, is that as you look at chapter 34, God is silent, right? We'll see that all the way through. There's nothing where God comes in and says, excuse me for a minute, right? And I believe that's an intentional move here. Not that God is absent or things, but when we look at the two courses of action by Jacob and by the sons, what we're going to see is neither one of them is God-pleasing, right? And we'll talk more about that when we get to that point. But it's almost for us as readers to go, yeah, so nobody tried to talk to God about this? Like nobody sought him out? No? Okay. All right. Here's the result of that, right?
But if they had sought out God, he would have said, what you're doing is wrong.
Correct.
The circumcision is a sign of my covenant with you.
Correct.
Just like the rainbow was a sign of the covenant with Noah.
Correct.
And they're misusing that covenant now for their own intentions.
Yep. Yeah, there are times where, and I can't speak to that in terms of the sons of Jacob and their intent, why or why not, in terms of consulting with God, talking with him on these things. But you also have to admit that there are times where you maybe don't go to him in prayer because you know what the answer is and you don't want to know what the answer is, right? Like, I know that's not what I'm supposed to do, so I'm not even going to ask. It's what's the saying? And I do not recommend this in the Christian life, right? It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, right? That's not discipleship. I just want to be clear on that at all.
As long as you end the prayer with, nevertheless, not my will, that thine be done.
Absolutely, 100%. Covers a multitude of sins. Multitude of sins. Yeah, absolutely. But it's that concept of, yeah, if Jacob would have consulted God, God probably would have said, what are you doing? Go get your daughter. Go. Don't sell your daughter's dignity for peace that I've already promised you, by the way, right? Like, this is not something new. This is not something foreign to you. I've been telling you this for chapters now in this book, right? And for the sons, don't do it. Do not do it. Do not misuse my covenant that way. Do not. But neither one of them decided to do that. Yeah. So that's essentially where we end up here at this point. So the town agrees to it. Every male who's circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city, which we find out is basically every male in the city. Any questions, though, before we move on to that? All right, so verse 25. On the third day when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, so here we have that transition here, right, in the pronoun thing, who Dinah is, who she belongs to, responsibility. They took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones, and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and they plundered. So, this is how it goes down. The third day they were sore. And by sore, you might as well just say paralyzed. Okay? There's no movement happening here. Because you talk about two sons, Simeon and Levi, who are not half-brothers. They are 100% Dinah's brothers. And they go through and they kill every male. Every single one. Okay? It just tells you how incapacitated they were. That nobody could even put up a fight. No one could even resist. It's two guys going in the town and killing all the guys. So it just kind of shares how good they were at carrying out a very deceitful plan, right? It worked very well for them in that way. And then you see the rest of the brothers come along and they plundered the city because they had defiled his sister. And why plunder the city after you've killed all the males? Why even kill all the males? And again, it goes back to that thought process that this wasn't a kept secret, what happened to Dinah, right? It wasn't like it was only like a handful of people who knew about it. The whole town seemed to know about it. Jacob found out about it from someone else, not even Hamor and Shechem. He found out about it from someone else. And so in the brothers' eyes, you're guilty by association. That's essentially how they carried out their justice here. And so that's why you have all the males. That's why you have all of those things in the city, the plundering, all of that jazz. Okay?
Does this restore the sanctity of the covenant?
Tell me more about that.
Well, first of all, they allowed them to be circumcised, which was the wrong thing to do because it's a covenant sign of God.
Right.
But now they've destroyed the recipients of that covenant. And so we go back to only the children of Jacob are circumcised,
Yeah.
and not the children of Shechem
And his dad.
father and his buddies.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think the sanctity of the covenant always rests with God, in terms of his establishment of it and his promises with it. But it definitely brings it back to only Jacob and his family, for sure. There are no...
The text doesn't give us that information.
No, and there's no stragglers. It's very clear. All of them who were circumcised are dead, right? Every single one of them. There wasn't somebody left behind. The only ones who were left alive are the women and the children. So,
And
yeah.
vengeance is the Lord's.
Correct. Correct. And we'll talk more about that because, well, let's do it this way, right? I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a second. Your daughter, your family member experiences this situation. I don't know about you, but anger is very much the emotion. And you've seen that anger come out in many different ways, manifest itself in killing, in just lots of different ways. This is not a completely unrelatable situation. If it's your family, what would you do? And in a sterile environment, it's easy for us to say, well, I would consult the Lord and go from there. Boy, I don't know. That's a hard thing to come up with, and that's a hard place to be in the midst of the heat that you're feeling in that moment. There are many different videos and many different instances where parents who have had their daughters or their sons raped, they go after the person, right? I remember one video in particular. There was a guy walking through an airport. This was the 80s when airport security really wasn't a thing, right? And I remember watching this video, and he's walking through the airport, and the dad of the kid who was violated walked up and shot him, killed him, just like that, dead, right? It's hard to imagine being in those situations, and it's hard to imagine what we might do or how we might respond in these situations. But what's so important for us to understand is that neither of these are the right outcomes, right? The right answers for that. And I understand someone may hear that, someone may see that and go, I disagree with that. I get it, right? I understand the emotions and the power of the emotions and in what the brothers are experiencing. Like, I can't say I've ever felt that, but I can see where they're coming from. But at the same time, we are children of God always, first and foremost. And how does that come out then in these moments? And that's always the tough question to answer is, well, what do we do as children of God when we're in this situation, when we're the brothers, when we're Jacob, those kinds of things? What do we do when we're the parents of somebody, when we're the siblings of somebody? And that's the tough part because there's a lot of options. But the best option is to continue to go back to God and trust that God has got that in his hands. To not take it into our own, to use the God-given systems we have to bring about justice, and if we feel that those systems aren't bringing about justice, to work in those systems to get that justice done, right? that's the course for us. And then lots of time in God's Word, lots of time with a good Christian counselor, lots of time with family. But God has created the system that we have, good, bad, indifferent. It's part of it, right? And so we operate in that system. We trust in the justice, knowing that God's justice is done through it. Not always, not to perfection, but that's the hard part, is not wanting to take this into our own hands. But that's a very dangerous place for us to be.
And don't you think that sometimes God's justice may not be in our lifetime?
Oh, it may not be something we see.
Yeah.
Yep.
that we may not see.
It may be something we don't even understand happens, or things of that nature.
But I mean, that's very difficult.
It is. It's very difficult to see the person who committed the crime, whatever the crime may be. Take it out of this context, put it into burglary, put it into assault, put it into grand theft. I mean, you name it, right? And then you see that person out on the streets 3 to 6 years later. Boy, that doesn't feel good. That's a lifelong situation. That's hard. That's hard. It's really hard. And I know in the evening class they talked about it. They were struggling a little bit with that concept that, you leave it in God's hands and in the systems that God has created to bring about His justice, understandably so. Because then the question came up, what about war? What about conflict? Right? And one thing I know with war is all bets are off. And especially in war, oh my gosh, just relying on the grace of God to get you through it. I wish I could say that there's an easy path in that, that somehow seeing your enemy as someone who's created in the image of God is something you should always be seeing, but I guarantee they don't see you that way. And so it's either going to be you or them in those contexts. It's hard. And that's what makes it so challenging living in a broken world. And in Genesis 1 and 2, we don't have to have these conversations, right? They don't exist. It's not a thing. Genesis 3 up until today, they are very much a part of conversation. And that's the challenge in conflict. You talk about Israel and Hamas or those situations. How do you expect them to behave or carry that out with the atrocities that have been committed? Man, trusting in God, leaning into Him. But boy, that's a really hard thing to do in the front lines at the moment. And sometimes, as broken people, we do break. And you can't always know what's right or wrong in those broken moments. You just don't. If you ever read some of the stories from World War II, the 18-year-olds who were island hopping, you could have pointed that out and said, that's a horrible thing you just did, don't do that. And they're not even going to understand one thing that you talk to them about. Not because they don't understand right and wrong, but because they're so broken in that moment from what they've had to experience that there's no possible way in that moment they could even tell you what's right or wrong. They just know survival. And they just know that they lived. And some of their buddies didn't. And man, yeah, Ross.
And there are people in both ranks that don't want to see peace.
Correct.
I mean, within, one country say, yeah, let's have peace, but there are people within their own country that say, I'm not going to let that happen.
Right. No. Yeah. It's a tough place to be, right? It's very easy for us and a lot of people to understand the brother's perspective and to go, yeah, rock on, man, do it, right? Take the justice, take it. They deserve that. It's what it should have happened if they didn't speak up, all those things. But still, God is not to be found there, right? His wisdom, His justice, His mercy, His being is not being shared in those moments when that's what we do. And again, please understand, we are speaking in a sanitary environment, in hypothetical situations. That's not always the best place to be able to always speak intelligently to these things, but that's where we're at. and it's what we have.
It's kind of like counting to 10 before you do something.
What's that?
Counting to 10 before you do something.
Yeah, I would highly suggest counting to 10 before you do something. Yeah, and that's again where, as people who are broken, things break even more, and sometimes that brokenness is so far gone that even counting to 10, you go, nope, and I'm not making light of that, Ross. No. I'm not making light of that, but it's the reality where people could sit for years and still come to the same conclusion because whatever that was just snapped. And there is no complete understanding of what is right or wrong in that moment. And that's where all we've got is God's grace. You hope it never happens to you, but you never know. And you never want to be in those moments, but it's where God's grace is more than enough. So the brothers acted. They did this thing, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so now they've got the consequences. So then we go into verse 30. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me a stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But the brothers said, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" Okay. So, we see Dinah again described there throughout this whole process. Not Jacob's daughter, it's Dinah's brothers now. One thing to keep in mind with this, with Dinah, and I just want to back up a little bit into that, where Dinah was, the brothers came and rescued her. Okay, she wasn't still roaming the streets after this had happened. She was kept in Shechem's house. Okay, she was a prisoner. That's why we say it wasn't just rape, it was also kidnapping. Right? She was held there against her will. And so the brothers, I should back up into that. The brothers came when they did their thing, and they saved their sister from the house. Okay? So it's important to understand that. It's not like she was raped and then she was let go and came home. They kept her in the house and didn't let her leave. So then afterwards, Jacob is just livid, just ripping ticked, right? He lambasts the two brothers for doing this thing, so much so that when Jacob dies here close to the end of Genesis, they don't get the blessing from Jacob. He's so mad at them for this, so ticked that they don't get the blessing. It's not theirs. That's it. Okay? And we'll see that here in a couple of chapters. We'll walk through that when we get to Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's just there's a lot of Jacob withholding from his sons because of their actions. Okay? And so this event here, no blessing for them. And what his concern is now, more conflict will come. This is where we get that thought process that Jacob is just trying to keep the peace, right? Just let's not stir up anything. Yeah, that happened to Dinah. Let's just keep it on the down low, right? Let's not cause a stir. Brothers go and cause a stir. Well, geez, thanks a lot, guys. Now you've made my life miserable. In fact, for that phrasing in Jacob there, when he talks about you have brought trouble on me all the way through, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. Okay, that's 16 words in Hebrew. All that sentence there, that big long rebuke from Jacob, 16 words, and 8 of them contain I, me, or my. Okay, so out of those 16 words, half of them he manages to bring himself into it. Okay, just to give you an idea of where Jacob is at in this and where his thoughts are, which really hasn't changed much for Jacob. Okay? So he is not thrilled at all. And then we get this question at the end in verse 31. should he treat our sister like a prostitute? Who's the he?
Shep?
Could be Shechem, could also be Jacob. Could also be Jacob. Because what was Jacob doing? He was selling his daughter's dignity for peace, right? Okay. These brothers are rambunctious. They are, and we'll see that more as we get into the Joseph story, just how rambunctious these guys are. They are right in their father's footsteps. Okay? They're not far behind them or behind him. And while it would appear that mostly they're just responding to Jacob talking about Shechem, there's also some things that point to the fact that they were asking that of Jacob, right? Essentially calling him out on that. Okay.
Pastor,
Anything?
quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, Ross.
The two brothers that went to kill everybody,
Simeon and Levi?
and Simeon?
Yep. Yep, Simeon and Levi. Leah's sons. Yep. Leah's sons.
Why did they just up and wipe out basically the neighborhood people?
Yeah.
And there could be somebody out there that nothing to do with this or whatever. They just figure, well, since you're part of the tribe, you're wrong.
Yeah, it's essentially, and this is where God's justice is best because God understands what needs justice. Whereas for us, we're willing to go in and say you're guilty by association, so therefore here's justice, right? That you get wiped out, even maybe that you had nothing to do with it. Now you could argue that because they got circumcised, they were on board with Hamor and Shechem and all the things. Sure, you could make that argument, but it doesn't mean that they committed the act, right? That brought about the anger and the mass killing. And so you've got this situation where their justice is very much in their own eyes. What is best?
So what, they think it's gold.
Yeah, essentially, if you're a part of this town, you're guilty. Yeah. So even taking the women and the children, they're not going to live lives of comfort. They're going to be servants. Right? They're going to be put to work, if you will, versus, yeah, we're sorry we killed the guys in your town, but why don't you come over here? We'll take care of you well. Right? No, they're going to be put to work. They'll be servants. And we talked about that hard question with a really hard answer. It's, where is God in all this? He's still there, right? But it's very clear that what comes through in this whole chapter is just no desire to consult, to go to God in this instance. In our case, it would be not wanting to even open up your Bible, right? And just read through, what should I do, right? How should I handle this? How should I walk through this? There's just no desire. And so it's in all those moments. It's not like God left or God was somehow gone. It's just they decided to leave him out all together. God's still there. He's still doing his thing, but they just had no desire to reach out to him to see what to go in those or what to do in those instances. And that's true in just a lot of things. In a lot of tragedies, God is there. He's not gone. He didn't leave. He's always there and still doing what he needs to do. But us ignoring that or trying to remove him from that in the sense of just not even acknowledging, we rob ourselves of that comfort and knowledge that he is there in those times and places. At the very minimum. There's so much more that comes from it. We just rob ourselves of those times. So any questions about chapter 34? Anyone ready to move on?
Answerable question.
Yeah, any answerable questions? Who wants to move on? Like maybe that's a better question.
So there's hope in 35.
There's hope in 35. There always is. Pass those around here. Always hope. What's your bet, Nate? Left or right?
You're winning, Mary. It's a tie.
It's a tie?
Yeah.
That's how God would want it, right? Yeah. Loves all of his children equally. Everybody get one?
One short.
One short? We've got a few right here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
All right, so chapter 35. God blesses and renames Jacob. So God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears. Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. Okay. So God shows up and says, "It's time to go, Jacob." So tells him to go to Bethel. If you remember, what's so special about Bethel is it's the place where God appeared to Jacob in the dream with the angels ascending and descending on the stairs. Okay. So that's essentially where he's telling him to go back to. Go back to that place where I appeared to you and made that promise to you. And we know that, when he was fleeing from Esau, right? That was the context there, but that's where he's asking him to go back, or telling him to go back. And for Jacob, I'm sure this request from God just comes as a huge relief because he doesn't want to stay in the land any longer. Okay? His brother or his sons just really did a riptide here, right? Like there is a bunch of waves. He's not sure about who's coming from where and when and how that might avenge this town. So he's going, yep, time to pack up and leave. Timing couldn't be better. He's ready to go.
And can't you just hear all the women saying, "Oh, not again"?
Yeah, that's seriously. Yeah, right. Ain't that the truth? Yeah. I picture there's more of that sigh too, just that piece of it. The one that my wife gives me so often. Yeah.
How come, it says near
Shechem?
Shechem?
Yep.
And then, is he a human?
Shechem? Yeah, he was, so in 34, he's the guy.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
so I was
And
wondering-
Shechem is also a town. Yep, it's probably his
Oh.
town. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That would be, there's nothing that I saw that confirmed that in the sense of, yes, Shechem is named after Shechem. But the pronouns there of his town kind of imply Shechem is Shechem's town. Yep.
Even Haley didn't have an answer to that question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of all the things that Haley's answered in my life,
Yeah.
talking about Haley's commentary,
Yeah. Yeah.
he doesn't, he slides right over Shechem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that it could be, it would make sense that that's what it is, but nothing definitive that says, yeah, that's what it is. Yep. Well, he's dead. Yeah. 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 Nope, near the town, because Shechem is a town that continues all the way through, even with the Philistines later on in 1st and 2nd Samuel. Yeah, it's a big piece of that. All right, so we hear in verse 3 from Jacob, Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone. So for Jacob, what distress is he talking about exactly here? Okay? Just think about that for a second. You know, the problems he's experienced, right? You could make the argument for Laban. That was, you know, basically the con man getting conned there a little bit, with Laban trying to take advantage of him. There's distress there. But robbing Esau of his blessing, being kind of led into exile, if you will, as a result of that. How he's treated Leah, and therefore a result of the sons, Esau's relationship. When you look at Jacob's life, a lot of his distress is self-inflicted, okay? Which I think is true for our lives too, honestly, in some cases. So when he says that the God who's delivered him from my distress, he's talking about the God who saved him from himself, essentially, right? I think that's just such an important thing to point out here, right? It's what God does, not necessarily, you know, in the one-to-one like us to Jacob, like we're mischievous or all those things like Jacob, but what God does for us every day is he saves us from ourselves, right? If we want to talk about deliverance, that's what it is, because sin makes us our own worst enemy. We are the worst, right, in terms of that piece. And so God's deliverance, God's Savior in Jesus Christ coming into our lives, that's all that is. It's just saving us from ourselves. Now, it doesn't mean we always make the right choices, but it's actually a good acknowledgement by Jacob saying, yeah, in my distresses, he saved me. Caused a lot of them myself, but he still saves me, right? Same thing with us. God saves us in our distresses. Some of them are very much self-inflicted. Some of them are completely unrelated and just as a result of a broken world. You talk about disease, you talk about those who are in the path of war that had nothing to do with it, right? But in this context, primarily what Jacob is talking about here is saving him from himself. That's what God has done.
He's asking for forgiveness.
Essentially, yep. Yep. He's acknowledging that this is who God is. Yeah.
You know, I think it's also kind of a moment of reflection. You know, I mean, we all do that. It's like we do something, like we think about it later and say, what was I thinking about?
Yeah. Right. Right. Oh, 100%. You know, one of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 46. And the reason for that is because it covers a multitude of things. It's, oh my goodness, I just read it this morning and now the wording is escaping me. Therefore I will not fear though the earth give way, the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, the waves roar and foam with their surging, right? The Lord Almighty is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress, be still and know that I am God. That's kind of the context of that passage. And what I love about it is I can see the earth giving way, mountains falling to the heart of the sea, the chaos and things that come from that as a result of my decisions, right? And yet the psalm tells me that God still saves me in the midst of that. But I can also see it as things that I have nothing to do with, yet still impact my life, and brokenness. Again, I go back to disease. I go back to some of those situations that it's just what it is. And it feels like the earth is given way, the mountains have fallen into the heart of the sea, the waves are roaring. And yet still, regardless of what it is, self-inflicted or not, our God is the Savior of it all. And he is our fortress, our standing strong point that we can take hope in.
Question, guys.
Yeah.
Where is Esau in all this? Because, you know, Jacob thinks he's got this terrible situation that created when Dinah was raped and everything.
Yep.
But Esau's not that far away.
No, he's in Nebraska, right? No, no, but we
60 miles away or 50
it's
miles away?
they're on opposite ends, right, of the map of the Promised Land. Like if you were to look at the map of the Holy Land, if you will, yeah, they're basically on opposite ends. Chad Bird talked about this in his book, and he's being silly but serious in it in terms of the length, right, in terms of the distance. You know, basically it's like they met up in Kansas, and one went to Oklahoma. One went to Kansas, and the other one went to no, I'm sorry, whatever that is. The states above and below that, right? Yeah, so they're basically a great distance away, at least what we would consider at that time a great distance because of how long it would take to travel with everything, right? So-
They walked everywhere.
They did, yeah. And so there's, even a 60-mile journey could be a long time. We'll actually see that in Joseph. The length he takes to go find his brothers, because Jacob sends them out to go find them. They're taking care of the sheep and things. 50 miles away. And so when the brothers decide to sell him off and they damage his coat, make it seem like an animal attacked him, it's a very believable story because a lot can happen in 50 miles at that time. So it's just very, very far away.
But he just totally lost touch with Esau, who he just made
Reconnection with, yeah. And I think that just speaks again to where Jacob was in that relationship. Esau spoke in familial terms, right? Brother, brought him back in, right, as the fold. It's the prodigal son, the father hugging the kid, right? It's Esau hugging Jacob, and Jacob kind of being like, "That's cool," right? Like just almost like a teenage kid, right? Like, don't hug me. We're still kind of connected, but I really don't, He put up a wall, that barrier there, and it's hard to say for sure exactly why, but Jacob just seems to be in a very defensive posture. Right, it is. Paranoia is probably a good term to describe whether it's his engagement with Esau, which should have been more of like, oh my goodness, yes, this is incredible, what an amazing thing. And even here with his daughter in chapter 34, like, oh no, God will take care of us. I need to step up and trust in him for his justice in this moment rather than shirk away from it and kind of shrink away from it. So, yeah, he lives in a lot of fear. Which is not the place for any of us to be, but it's also the place that we most often find ourselves in. And that's not to say, like, oh my goodness, shame on you. Like, I would be pointing those at me. It's easy to be in those places of fear. But yeah, that's where he finds himself. 100%.
It's interesting that at the end of chapter 34, Jacob is very concerned that he can get attacked and wiped out. Chapter 35 starts with God coming to him. It doesn't say that he went to God to talk about it. God came to him, gave him the solution, which kind of, Jacob slapped himself in the head and said, oh,
Yeah.
I've been on the wrong path here.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, I forgot about him, right? Like, that's a thing. That's right. God is there. And that's what God does in all of our lives. Not in the sense of showing up like he did to Jacob and telling us to go to Bethel or something, but this is why daily of this is such a good thing, because it's those daily reminders of, oh yeah, that is right. And even the minute by minute reminders of, oh yeah, he is there. I forgot about that. That's why Jacob is such a great model for discipleship, is because he is us, like in so many ways. We may not do the same things in the sense of, Dinah or Esau or, being the great deceiver or something, but to some extent we can relate to everything he's done. And even the forgetfulness of God, even though God just reminded us, right, of who he is, we're going, oh, man, today is really bad. I'm not sure about this. All those things, and oh yeah, that's right, that's who God is. He's there with me. Okay, great. And then 3 minutes later go, but today really stinks. Like I've done that many times and still continue to do it, right? Like, he is us in so many ways. And that's the blessing of Genesis 2 in this is, Jacob is us, we are him, and God is always who he is, right? So even in the midst of seeing who we are, looking in the mirror almost, if you will, we still see God's reflection in us and shining on us in those times. And we get to have our moments too, where we say good things. Sometimes that happens.
I find it so interesting that sometimes when you think of the book of Genesis, it's kind of like, oh, that's, God created the earth, yada, 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 and that's, Old Testament. And yet there's so much in it that's so relatable to our relationship with the Lord and how we react to it. And it's just, it's really cool.
It's a relational
And
book.
thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's a relational book. That's the blessing of Genesis. It's, I think there are often times we look at some of the books of the Bible and we go, boy, that's data, that's information,
Yeah.
right? Or that's just, something. No, it's this book in particular is a relational book. And you could say that about all of them to some extent. I mean, you talk about Numbers. That's where all the Bible reading in a year goes off the rails, right? People trying to read through Numbers and 133,000, the tribe of Benjamin, but you read through those things and you see that this is how God is relating to his people. Like that's what those books are. All of them are. It's God trying to relate to his people and help his people understand who he is. It's a relationship book. It is. And there's some great facts and things in there. It's always fun to find things that you go, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. But at the end of the day, it's always about God's relationship with his people, which is fun. So then we get this statement about the foreign gods. And you got to love Jacob's casualness with this. Like, all right, so you've had those for a while. Let's just put them away. Like, get rid of them. Okay, it's not a good thing, so we can keep moving on. Okay? And so it's just an odd statement. And the question comes like, so did they have them? Like, where did they get them? How did they get there? All those things. Couple of thoughts to that. Obviously, we don't know if Rachel ever got rid of her families, right? The ones she sat on and wouldn't stand up for, right? There's those. These women and children that they just took from the city, they probably had their own gods too that they brought with them, okay? So there's lots of different places where this all could come from. It's not an unusual statement, I guess you could say, in terms of where that is. And this is where we see that God and thing that we talked about, where we have those little gods in our pockets that we like to walk around with. Yes, we've got God, and we've also got these things, right? Jacob is basically saying it's time to stop messing around here. Let's get serious about this and take care of this. Wherever they have come from, these different gods. Okay. So then we get this oak tree. So that's essentially what a terebinth tree is. It's an oak tree. I don't know, maybe your Bible has that translated as oak tree. Mine says terebinth, but essentially it's an oak tree. Yeah.
What is the significance of rings in their ears?
Yeah, it's basically God's command to never wear earrings. No, that's not what it is. I believe, no, it's a fair question. It's essentially, if I understand correctly, how they were, what they were, is relating back to the pagan practice that they were adopting. So it's not saying you can't wear jewelry. That's not the piece there. Their jewelry was directly tied to their spiritualism with those pagan gods. So in other words, you got to get rid of it because those things are part of your spiritual practice with false gods. Yeah.
Seems to be coming back.
Yeah.
It's worn in a lot of different places.
Oh yeah. But this is tied directly to spiritual practice, just to be clear. Like, not so much these things like in your ears, okay, or going to Claire's.
It's a whole different subject.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, how many of you took your kids to Claire's? Anybody take kids, grandkids to Claire's to get their ears pierced? Yeah, like I didn't take my kids there, but I remember like that was the thing in high school, like, or in middle school and things like, oh, you had to go to Claire's at the mall. They'll pierce your ear. And I always loved that too because they had the chair like right by the entrance. And so people would walk by and you'd have these kids just bawling their eyes out. You're going, this is terrible brand management. Like, this is what people see when they walk into your store. Kids are crying, like blood is flowing. You're like, what is this? Come get a scrunchie, right? Don't worry about the kid crying and bleeding over here. Like, it was the weirdest thing, but yeah, no, it was a big deal. But yeah, that's where it's tied to. It's more tied to the religious practice than it is anything about the jewelry. Yeah. Yep. Good question. Good question. So again, going back to this, oak tree situation, they buried him under there. My text says hid. It's more literally buried, and maybe yours has that too. So it's not like he just kind of snuck them out and put them around like nobody's watching or something. He buried them. And the significance of putting them there is that's the place that typically the idolatry was practiced. So essentially he's leaving the idols where the idolatry was practiced, at that tree. Okay. One of the commentaries I read, and I thought this is a great way of saying it, is another way to look at this is it's the place for idol worship, and that place becomes the burial ground for it. Okay. I thought those were good words. Any questions about that at all? Okay. Well, we will stop there. And we'll pick it up next week. Chapter 35 goes pretty quick. 36, if you wanted to read that, feel free to do so. We won't be reading that one because it's basically just a long list of Esau's descendants. And I'm really not in the mood to be tongue-tied trying to read through all the descendants. But we'll touch on that next week as to why that's there, what its purpose is, all of those things. But if you want to read that, feel free to do so. And then chapter 37 is Joseph's dreams. Okay? So we're moving right along in how this goes. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for just the reminders of who we are, but who we are more importantly with you in our lives. Lord, as we continue in our day, help us to see you, help us to know you, help us to remember where you are always, regardless of the circumstances. And help us, Lord, to be with you, to take that time to spend with you, especially in those tough moments that we have in front of us, wherever they might be. And so we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, have a great week.